Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Talk on Tuesday. I am your host, Matara. Just to set a quick expectation, as you can see, this is a long one. So, we're going to be with each other for some time tonight. I just hope that you do see it as valuable and get some information that will, hopefully change your life or help you in any way, as we move forward in this world. So, with that being said, I do just want to get right into it. This week's episode almost didn't happen the way that you are about to hear it. I originally planned for us to spend this evening talking about the prison system or data centers, but then Elon Musk happened. I read a few days ago that he admitted in an interview that he had become too involved, or as he would put it, carried away by the politics during the Doge administration period, or just period, excuse me. So now he just wants to put his attention back where he believes it belongs. And that is Tesla, that is SpaceX, that is artificial intelligence, that is in building, that is in creating, and that is in engineering. Now, whether you agree with Elon Musk, whether you disagree with him, whether you admire him or you can't stand him, I don't think that's actually the interesting part of the story, because it made me ask a different question. What if Elon Musk isn't the story anymore? What if the real story is the infrastructure being built around us? So just think about it. We have electric vehicles, we have artificial intelligence, we have autonomous robots, satellite internet, commercial space stations, and government modernization going on all at the same time. Now, none of these are isolated conversations anymore. They're beginning to overlap. They're becoming one larger system. Maybe this isn't a story about Elon Musk. Maybe it's a story about what humanity is quietly building next. So tonight, that's the journey I like to talk about together. So let's talk.
Did you see what happened in the markets today? No, but I heard something big is happening. It's not just the economy. Everything feels like it's changing. Wait, isn't that what they talk about on Tuesdays? Yeah, let's talk. On Tuesday.
All right, so I want to pick up where we left off from episode 3, and that was energy. Now let's start with Tesla. Tesla's battery and energy storage businesses are less culturally visible than its vehicles, but they are important. As some electricity comes from intermittent sources such as solar and wind, the grid needs ways to store energy for use when those sources are not producing. Large battery installations can help utilities balance supply and demand, manage peak periods, and strengthen grid resilience. Again, Tesla is not alone in that market, but it has helped turn energy storage into a major commercial business rather than a side project attached to the automobile company. Then there is artificial intelligence. Through Tesla, Musk has treated vehicles as moving computers equipped with cameras, processors, and software. Through xAI, he entered the competition to build large artificial intelligence systems. Through Neuralink, his companies are exploring whether the human nervous system can communicate more directly with computers, initially for medical purposes. Through X, formerly Twitter, he has attempted to combine social media, news payments, identity, and artificial intelligence within one platform. Whether that larger vision succeeds remains uncertain, but the intention is clear. He is not merely building isolated consumer products. He is attempting to assemble connected systems. Now that brings us to SpaceX, and SpaceX may be the most consequential business of them all. It's 20 years in the making. Before SpaceX became successful, orbital launch was dominated by governments and a relatively small number of established aerospace contractors. Launches were expensive, rockets were generally discarded after use, development moved slowly. Failure could delay a program for years. SpaceX approached the program differently. The company designed rockets that could return and be reused. Now that sounds obvious today because we have watched booster landings so many times that they almost appear routine. But an orbital class rocket returning from space and landing vertically was not routine when SpaceX began attempting it. It was treated by many observers as unrealistic. Now, reusable boosters have become central to SpaceX's operating model. That has allowed the company to launch frequently, build operational experience, and reduce the cost of access to orbit compared with older launch models. Now, the impact was not simply a better rocket, it changed expectations. Customers began expecting faster launch schedules. Governments gained another option for national security and scientific missions. Satellite companies could consider constellations consisting of hundreds or thousands of spacecraft. Other launch companies faced pressure to develop reusable systems of their own. SpaceX did not just enter the launch market, it changed what customers believed the launch market should and be able to deliver. Then came Starlink. At first, satellite internet sounded like a service for people who lived far away from cities, and that remains part of the purpose. But Starlink quickly became more than a rural internet product. It became disaster response infrastructure. It's now a way to establish connectivity in places where the ground network was unavailable, destroyed, or politically restricted. That changed the strategic value of the company. A rocket provider can transport a government satellite. A communications provider can influence what a government, military, or population can do after the satellite is deployed. That is a cheaper form of power. Now I want to be careful here. Recognizing Musk's influence does not require us to pretend that everything he does is successful. His companies have faced lawsuits, regulatory disputes, workplace complaints, and a serious question about corporate governance. His public conduct has also created political and business risk for the companies associated with him. There is a mistake people sometimes make when discussing influential figures. They believe we have to choose between calling someone a genius or calling that person a fraud. History is rarely that simple. An individual can be highly innovative and deeply controversial. A leader can produce major breakthroughs while making serious mistakes. A company can transform an industry and still deserve scrutiny. Those ideas can exist at the same time. To me, Musk's greatest impact is not that he personally invented everything associated with his companies. Thousands of engineers, technicians, scientists, designers, factory employees, and government partners made those achievements possible. His impact is that he helped organize capital, talent, and public attention around projects that many investors considered too expensive, too slow, or just too risky. Now, he made certain ideas feel commercially urgent. So we have electric transportation, reusable rockets, global satellite communications, large-scale battery storage, human settlement beyond Earth, and then artificial intelligence connected by physical machines, so robots. So whether every part of that vision succeeds is still unknown. But industries are already moving differently because those companies exist. And that is why I would describe Musk less as a traditional inventor and more as an infrastructure entrepreneur. He looks at an existing system and he asks, why does it cost so much? Why does it move so slowly? Which parts can be removed? Which parts can be automated? Which components can be manufactured internally? And what would happen if the system were rebuilt from the foundation rather than improved one piece at a time? That approach worked well enough in private industry to build some of the world's most valuable and strategically important companies. But then the same philosophy moved into a very different operating environment, the federal government. And that is where the experiment becomes much more complicated. Alright, so in January 2025, President Donald Trump issued an executive order establishing what became publicly known as the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Despite the name, DOGE was not created by Congress as a new cabinet-level department. The administration reorganized the existing United States Digital Service and renamed it the United States DOGE Service. Its formal mission included modernizing federal technology and software to improve government efficiency and productivity. Elon Musk became the public face of the initiative during the early and most aggressive phase. And on the surface, the basic argument behind DOGE was easy to understand. The federal government operates outdated technology. So there's underused office spaces, contracts outliving their original purpose, improper payments, administrative errors, and fraud allegedly costing taxpayers substantial amounts of money. That was the premise. Now, government watchdogs were documenting these problems long before DOGE existed. The Government Accountability Office has spent years identifying duplication, fragmentation, and opportunities to reduce costs across federal programs. Its work shows that government inefficiency is not an imaginary problem invented by one administration. So the underlying question was legitimate. Can the federal government operate more efficiently? Of course it can. Almost everyone agrees with that in principle. The disagreement begins when we ask what counts as waste, who gets to decide, and how quickly should changes occur. And what happens when efficiency conflicts with legal obligation, public access, institutional knowledge, and continuity of service. So think about it like this. A private company can decide that a division is no longer profitable and close it. Government does not operate entirely by that logic. A government agency may provide a service precisely because the private market cannot deliver it profitably. A rural office may look inefficient on a spreadsheet while remaining essential to the people who depend upon it. A research program may not produce immediate financial returns, but its discoveries may become valuable decades later. A public health worker may appear as a labor expense until an outbreak occurs. And an inspector may seem like bureaucracy until a bridge fails, a food product is contaminated, or a financial institution collapses. This is where the engineering metaphor begins to run into trouble. A machine has a defined purpose. A government has many purposes, and some of them conflict. It has to provide a service. So it needs to enforce laws, protect rights, maintain national security, collect revenue, respond to emergencies, preserve records, and support research. It needs to serve the people in densely populated cities and remote communities. And it must do these things while operating under laws written by Congress, decisions issued by courts, and constitutional limits that no corporate chief executive has to manage in the same way. So when DOGE entered agencies with an aggressive cost-cutting mandate, supporters saw urgency, and critics saw a demolition crew. Sometimes they were looking at the exact same action. Now, DOGE and the administration pointed to canceled contracts, terminated leases, regulatory reductions, workforce cuts, and technology changes as evidence of savings. Its public website later reported estimated savings of approximately $250 billion, although the amount displayed by the government was an estimate rather than an independently audited financial accounting. And that distinction is important. Announcing that a contract has been canceled does not automatically mean the government received the full listed value as cash savings. You may reduce one expense while producing another expense somewhere less visible. For example, DOGE reported hundreds of federal lease terminations and significant projected real estate savings. The Government Accountability Office noted those reported figures, but it had not independently reviewed their accuracy or established whether the lease terminations addressed the government's broader problem of underused property. That does not mean there were no savings. It means the precise amount requires verification. And in a conversation about government accountability, verification should not be treated as an inconvenience. It should be the whole point. Now, the workforce reductions were far more visible. Federal employees accepted buyouts, retired early, or lost their positions. By early 2026, the civilian federal workforce had fallen to its lowest level in at least a decade, according to the government data reviewed by Reuters. Supporters argued that the government had become too large, too protected from accountability, and too resistant to change. They viewed the reductions as a necessary correction. Critics argued that the rapid cuts removed experienced employees, disrupted public services, and forced some agencies to reverse mistakes or bring workers back. Reuters documented cases involving purchasing bottlenecks, delayed decisions, longer wait times, and highly paid specialists being diverted to routine administrative work after supporting staff were removed. That was the tension at the center of DOGE. The economic effect is also complicated than a simple savings total. When federal workers leave their jobs, the government may reduce future payroll expenses, but those workers also are consumers. They pay mortgages, they buy groceries, they hire contractors, use childcare, and they support restaurants and local businesses. So in areas that a large federal presence, sudden job losses can reduce local economic activity. Contract cancellations may save federal money, but they can also affect private companies and local governments that expected the work. At the national level, the reductions were not large enough by themselves to reshape an entire United States economy. Federal spending is measured in the trillions of dollars. So Reuters found that spending reductions in the agencies most directly targeted by DOGE were significantly smaller than the initiative's early public ambitions, although some effects would take longer to appear in government accounts. So economically, DOGE should not be described as a single event that either rescued or destroyed the American economy. Its immediate impact was concentrated. So specific agencies, specific workers, specific contractors, specific communities. Its longer-term impact depends on what remains after the cuts. Did agencies adopt better software? Did procurement improve? Were obsolete contracts permanently eliminated? Did the government reduce duplication? Were public services maintained? Or will future administrations have to rebuild capacity at greater cost? Those questions require time and transparent accounting. But there is another issue here that we cannot ignore. Elon Musk was helping shape a government efficiency initiative while his companies maintained substantial relationships with that same government. SpaceX conducts work for NASA, the Department of Defense, the Space Force, and the intelligence community. That does not automatically mean improper conduct occurred. Government contractors regularly engage with policymakers, but it created an obvious conflict of interest concern. The public had a right to ask whether decisions involving regulators, contract investigations, or agencies connected to Musk's companies were being handled independently. That question matters even when no violation has been proven. Public trust does not depend only on whether a conflict changes an outcome. It also depends on whether the process is transparent enough for people to evaluate the possibility. And maybe that is the larger lesson for DOGE. Government absolutely needs modernization. It needs better technology. It does need stronger cybersecurity, more understandable systems, faster service. The need is real. But a government reform cannot be measured only by how much it has removed. It must also be measured by what still works afterwards. Now, Elon Musk brought the operating philosophy of a technology entrepreneur into Washington. So move quickly, question everything, reduce the workforce, cancel what appears unnecessary, use software to accelerate decisions. Treat the existing structure as something that can be rebuilt. Now, for supporters, that was the disruption government had resisted for decades. For critics, it was an attempt to run a constitutional democracy like a privately controlled corporation. The truth. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you guys hear the airplane going by. If you listen to my previous episode, you have an idea of where I'm at. So, all right. So the truth may not live neatly into either description. May not fit neatly into either description. Doge exposed real inefficiencies. It also exposed the danger of confusing speed with precision. It forced a national conversation about the size and function of government. But it also raised an equally important question. Who should have the authority to redesign public institutions? And that brings us back to SpaceX, because Doge showed the complications of inserting a private sector builder into government. SpaceX represents something slightly different. It shows what happens when the government begins depending upon infrastructure that a private sector builder owns. NASA needs access to orbit, the military needs satellites, intelligence agencies need secure systems, astronauts need transportation, and the International Space Station will eventually need to be brought safely out of orbit. SpaceX is involved in all of that.
What if the next opportunity isn't something you buy? What if it's something you understand before everyone else? Technology is changing nearly every industry, including how communities connect, businesses engage, and digital ecosystems create value. Tripto is building a utility-driven platform designed around participation rewards and real-world engagement.
Curious?
Click the link in this episode description and decide for yourself.
All right, so SpaceX was founded in 2022 with a goal that sounded almost unreasonable at the time. So reduce the cost of space transportation enough to make human life beyond Earth more achievable. Now, I know that language can sound, a bit science fiction. And to be clear, a permanent human settlement on Mars is not something SpaceX has already accomplished. It remains a long-term objective with enormous technical, biological, financial, and political challenges. But before we dismiss the goal, we should look at what the goal forced the company to build along the way. So reusable rockets, cargo spacecraft, crew transportation, satellite communications, heavy lift launch capability, new engines, launch facilities, ground stations, tracking systems, and manufacturing capacity. Plus, a growing relationship with governments that need those systems for reasons that have very little to do with living on Mars. That is what caught my attention. The Mars vision may be a destination Musk talks about publicly, but the infrastructure being created on the way there already has value here, right now on Earth. Now, SpaceX designs and manufactures much of its own launch hardware rather than operating only as an assembler of systems produced by several outside companies. The vertical integration gives it more control over design, manufacturing, and testing. It can identify a problem, modify the hardware, test it, and bring that information back into the next version relatively quickly. That does not mean every test succeeds. Clearly, they do not. But SpaceX treats testing differently from many traditional aerospace programs. Failure during development is not automatically viewed as the end of the problem. The company often treats failure as information. That approach can look chaotic from the outside, and sometimes it is chaotic. But rapid testing has allowed the company to accumulate operational experience at a speed that would have been difficult under a slower, more traditional development model. The reusable Falcon 9 booster is probably the clearest example. Traditionally, most rocket stages were used once. Imagine buying a commercial airplane, flying it from Las Vegas to New York, and then throwing it away after the landing. Air travel would be incredibly expensive. That was essentially the economic problem facing orbital launch. A sophisticated vehicle was built, launched, and largely discarded. SpaceX answers you guys gotta excuse me, I can be a little dyslexic, so a little secret for my followers. Now, SpaceX's answer was to recover the first stage, inspect it, refurbish it when needed, and then fly it again. That does not make launch inexpensive in a everyday sense. Space flight is still costly, but reusability changes the economics. It allows SpaceX to use the same hardware repeatedly. It gives engineers data from multiple flights. It supports a faster launch schedule, and it allows the company to spread some of the manufacturing costs across several missions. That capability helped make SpaceX one of the most frequently used launch providers in the world. But here is where the business becomes more interesting. SpaceX is not only transporting satellites for customers, it also is transporting its own satellites, and that is Starlink. Now, Starlink is a large network of satellites in low Earth orbit designed to provide internet connectivity, and that network changes the company's position. A traditional launch company earns revenue when somebody buys a launch. SpaceX can earn revenue from a launch. It can also earn recurring revenue from communication services operating after the satellite reach orbit. So it owns part of the transportation system and part of the infrastructure being transported. That is a very different model. So picture a railroad company that also owns the communications network running beside the railroad, or a shipping company that owns the ports, the cargo, containers, and the tracking system. The more parts of the system a company controls, the less dependent it may become on an outside provider. But the more central that company also becomes to everyone who relies on those services, and that is where the conversation becomes beyond business. But Starlink is not only being used by families who need internet access. It has been used by ships, aircraft, emergency responders, businesses, governments, military organizations, and communities where normal terrestrial communication were damaged or unavailable. When a hurricane, wildfire, or other disaster interrupts ground-based systems, a satellite connection may restore communication without waiting for every cable and tower to be repaired. That gives the network humanitarian value. It also gives it strategic value. Now let's talk about Dragon. Now, SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft carries cargo and astronauts. Through NASA's Commercial Crew program, Crew Dragon restored the ability to launch astronauts to the International Space Station from the United States. Before that capability became operational, NASA relied on seats aboard Russia's Soyuz spacecraft, allowing the retirement of the space shuttle. So SpaceX did not simply win a transportation contract. It helped restore an American human launch capability. NASA purchases the service, but SpaceX designed and operates the transportation system. That relationship represents a major change in how the United States approaches human space flight. NASA previously designed and managed much more of the complete system itself. Under the commercial model, the government defines safety and mission requirements, supports development, supervises the work, and then purchases transportation from a privately operated vehicle. NASA becomes a customer, although a very involved and technically demanding customer. Then there is Starship. So Starship is not simply a larger Falcon 9. The company describes it as a fully reusable transportation system designed to carry both crew and cargo to Earth's orbit, the Moon, and eventually Mars. The complete vehicle consists of the Starship spacecraft and a super heavy booster. Now, its purpose is to move much larger amounts of material than SpaceX's existing system can carry. NASA is developing a lunar lander version of Starship for the Artemis program. Under the current plan, astronauts would travel toward the moon aboard NASA's Orion spacecraft and then transfer to a commercial landing system for the trip down the lunar surface. The future Artemis missions, SpaceX Starship human landing system is intended to serve as one of those landers. And this is where we have to slow down for a moment, because people hear the word moon and it feels like we are repeating the Apollo program. But that is not how NASA is describing Artemis. The stated objective is sustained exploration. That means returning repeatedly, testing equipment, moving cargo, building communications, conducting science, learning how people can work farther from Earth for longer periods. Now, possibly establishing the foundation for a more permanent presence. And a sustained presence requires something very different from a single historic mission. It requires logistics. Now, you cannot build any serious human operation beyond Earth with one rocket launch. You need a supply chain. And SpaceX is positioning Starship as one of the vehicles capable of moving the large amounts of cargo that a lunar operation would require. NASA has also asked SpaceX and Blue Origin to develop cargo versions of their lunar landing systems to deliver large equipment to the moon. That tells us something important. The government is no longer thinking only about how to place a person on the surface. It is thinking about how to move the materials necessary to keep an operation going. Now that is infrastructure. So when I say SpaceX is more than rockets, this is what I mean. The company is developing several connected layers. The rocket provides access, Dragon moves people and cargo, Starlink provides communications, Starship is intended to move much larger payloads, government contracts create a demand, commercial customers create additional demand. And every mission creates more data about how to operate reliably in space. So, maybe SpaceX is not best understood as a rocket company. Maybe it is closer to a transportation, logistics, and communications company whose operating territory happens to extend above the Earth. And once you see the company that way, the government relationship begins to make much more sense. Because governments do not need rockets just to say they have rockets. They need what rockets allow them to reach. Now, I know there are people listening who may be thinking, we have housing problems, we have debt, we have aging roads, we have schools that need resources, and we have healthcare problems. So why are governments spending billions of dollars in space? Now, that is a fair question, especially when space programs are presented as expensive adventures rather than serving a real human need. But here is the part that is easy to overlook. Most of us already depend on space. We just do not experience it as space. So we do use navigation apps. That's space. A plane follows a route. That's space. A farmer monitors crops. A meteorologist tracks a hurricane. A bank uses precise timing to help process transactions. A military unit communicates or tracks activity across a large area. A television station receives a live international feed. A rescue team studies wildfire movement. All uses space. So satellites are integrated into ordinary life so deeply that we usually notice them only when a service stops working. Governments need space for these reasons. Then there is national security. The United States Space Force describes assured access to space as a national security requirement. That is why it awards contracts to more than one launch provider. The government does not want every critical mission dependent on a single rocket. So in April of 2025, the Space Force awarded National Security Space Launch Phase 3 contracts to SpaceX, United Launch Alliance, and Blue Origin. The anticipated value assigned to SpaceX's portion was approximately $5.9 billion over the contract period, although actual payments depend on missions ordered and work performed. So in other words, SpaceX is very important, but the government is also trying to maintain alternatives. That is healthy. A country should be cautious about depending on one privately controlled company for a capability connected to national defense. Competition provides backup, and it creates pricing pressure. And it reduces the risk that one technical failure brings the entire launch schedule to a halt. So in 2025, SpaceX received 7 launch assignments valued at a combined total of approximately $845. It will $845.8 million. I was gonna just break it all down, but it's $845.8 million for missions involving Space Force, GPS, and National Reconnaissance and the National Reconnaissance Office. Additional 2026 awards covered launches for missile warning and missile tracking satellite networks. Those are not tourism missions. They are part of the national security architecture of the United States. Then there is NASA. There's a plan to retire the International Space Station in 2030, literally, by setting it on fire and discarding the remains within the Pacific Ocean. Now, NASA selected SpaceX to develop the United States deorbit vehicle. It's a spacecraft intended to help guide the ISS towards a controlled re-entry at the end of the station's life. Then there is a minor vendor relationship. This is strategic dependence. And strategic dependence creates an uncomfortable question. What happens when a capability that the government needs is owned by a private company? So a private company has shareholders or private investors. So they have executives, commercial priorities, legal rights, contract negotiations, internal policies, and a leader who may disagree publicly with the government purchasing the service. That relationship can create innovation. The private company can build faster, take greater risks, develop a service the government could not produce as efficiently on its own. But dependency also creates leverage. If only one provider can reliably deliver a service at the required scale, the provider gains influence. The government may still hold regulatory, contractual, and purchasing authority, but its practical choices become narrower. This is not unique to SpaceX. Governments have always relied on private contractors. So there's Boeing, there's Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and Raytheon. The government does not manufacture every product it uses. The difference with SpaceX is the concentration of several emerging capabilities within the same company. So there's launch, there's human spaceflight, there's satellite communications, lunar transportation, potential deep space logistics, and classified or defense-related services. That concentration makes SpaceX unusually important. Now let's talk about resilience. A government does not only ask, can this system work under ordinary conditions? It also asks, can it keep working during a disaster, a war, or a cyber attack? An attack on ground infrastructure, a disruption in another country. Satellite networks can provide alternative communication routes when terrestrial systems are damaged. A network of many satellites in low Earth orbit may also be harder to disable completely than one large satellite position much farther away. But that does not make the system invulnerable. It introduces a different set of risks. And that explains another reason governments care about launch frequency. If a nation has the ability to launch replacements quickly, it can recover more effectively. Launch capacity becomes part of the national resilience. It is similar to having shipyards during a naval conflict or manufacturing capacity during an industrial emergency. It is not enough to own the equipment currently in service. You need the ability to replace it. Then we have the scientific leadership. Governments fund space science because the results can improve our understanding of Earth and the solar system and the universe. our solar system, excuse me. Not, But science also builds industrial capability. A mission may require new sensors, materials, software, new methods of communication, and medical knowledge. A community that participates in difficult scientific projects develop people and companies capable of solving difficult technical problems. That knowledge can spread into other industries. The immediate return may not appear on a quarterly earnings report, but the long-term return may be substantial. And finally, governments need space because other governments need space. That sounds circular, but it does matter. Once a capability becomes strategically important, nations cannot simply ignore it because participation is expensive. And if other countries develop independent navigation, communications, lunar transportation, surveillance, and orbital servicing, those systems affect the balance of power. So governments invest partly because space provides direct benefits, and partly because they do not want to become dependent on another country for access to those benefits. That brings us to the global race, because the United States is not building the system alone, and SpaceX is not operating in an empty sky. Now, earlier in the conversation, I asked a simple question. Is this basically a race between the United States and China? And the honest answer is, at the highest level, yes, but not completely. So the United States and China are the two countries currently building the broadest end-to-end space systems. Both have launch capability, human space flight programs, lunar programs, satellite networks, national security programs, and large scientific institutions. And enough financial and political power to pursue several projects at the same time. That places them in a category of their own. But the rest of the world is not sitting still. Europe, India, and Japan may not be matching the United States and China in every category, but they possess technologies, partnerships, and specialized capabilities that will shape whatever comes next. So this is not a race where only one country reaches a finish line and everyone else loses. It is closer to a global competition to control different parts of a new industrial system. Let's begin with the United States. The American model is heavily commercial. NASA sets objectives and purchases services. The Space Force purchases launch capacity. Private companies own much of the hardware. Investors provide capital. Companies compete for contracts. The government funds development, supervises safety, and becomes an anchor customer, but it does not necessarily own every vehicle. That is the model behind commercial cargo, and the proposed commercial stations expect to follow the ISS. The strength of this model is competition. SpaceX can compete with Blue Origin. Blue Origin can compete with the United Launch Alliance. Axiom can compete with Starlab, VAST, and other station developers. Different groups can attempt different designs. If one country fails, another may succeed. Private capital can support ideas that might never survive a congressional budget process. But the weakness is that commercial space still depends heavily on government demand. A company may be called commercial while receiving a large portion of its opportunity through public contracts, government research, or access to government facilities. Now compare that with China. China operates a more centrally directed model. The national government establishes long-term priorities. State-owned aerospace organizations remain central. Commercial companies are growing, but they operate with a national strategy shaped more directly by the state. China already operates the Tiangong space station. While the ISS approaches retirement, Tiangong provides China with an independent platform for human spaceflight, research, and international cooperation. That timing matters. If the ISS retires before a commercial American replacement is fully operational, China could temporarily operate the only continuously crewed space station in orbit. That would not mean China owns space, but it would carry scientific, political, and symbolic weight. Now, China is also pursuing lunar exploration. Its Chang'e missions, missions have demonstrated increasingly advanced robotic capabilities. The country has publicly discussed sending astronauts to the moon and working with international partners on a future lunar research station. Like the United States, China appears to be moving beyond a single prestige mission. The objective is to build repeatable capability. So they want to launch, they want navigation, they want communications, robotic exploration, human transportation, scientific operations, and possibly resource research. That is why I would not describe China's efforts as simply copying the United States program. China is building an independent system designed to function without relying on the American infrastructure. China is also developing large satellite constellations. Part of the objective is broadband communication, but communication constellations also have strategic value. The country does not want its future digital or military infrastructure dependent on systems owned by a American company. The same logic is in reverse. The United States does not want critical communications dependent on Chinese-controlled networks. So, the commercial competition and the national security competition begin to overlap. Now, the difference between the American and Chinese systems is not simply private versus public. Both systems use government support. Both use companies. Both connect civilian and national security objectives. The distinction is mostly about coordination and ownership. The American model allows several powerful companies to compete, sometimes chaotically, under government contracts and market pressure. The Chinese model is more directly integrated into long-term national planning. The American system may produce faster commercial experimentation. The Chinese system may produce stronger coordination around a national objective. Each system has advantages. Each system has weaknesses. And both are trying to ensure they are not dependent on the other. Now, let's move to Europe. Europe is sometimes described as though it has fallen out of the space race. I think that description is too simple. Europe has faced serious launch challenges and delays. It does not currently possess the same commercial launch scale as the United States or the same state-driven human spacelift systems as China. But Europe remains highly capable in areas such as satellites, Earth observation, scientific instruments, robotics, aerospace manufacturing, and international missions. The European Space Agency is also a major partner in NASA's Artemis program. Now, Europe provides the service module for NASA's Orion spacecraft. The module supplies propulsion, power, water, air, and thermal control for the crew vehicle. So when American astronauts travel toward the moon aboard Orion, an essential part of the spacecraft is European. That is not a symbolic contribution. The mission cannot function without it. Now, Airbus is also involved in the proposed Starlab commercial space station. That partnership gives Europe a potential bridge from the ISS era into the commercial station era. Rather than building a completely independent European station, European institutions and companies may participate through partnerships. This has always been one of Europe's strengths. They have shared costs, shared scientific capability, and international coordination. The weakness, of course, is that cooperation can move slowly. Multiple countries have different budgets, priorities, and political concerns. But when Europe does commit, it brings decades of technical experience. Then there is India. India may be the country most people underestimate. Its space program has built a reputation for completing sophisticated missions with comparatively restrained budgets. Its lunar missions have demonstrated engineering capability. Its satellite program supports communication, weather, navigation, and Earth observation. Its Gaganyaan program is intended to establish an independent human space flight capability, and India is opening more of its space economy to private companies. India does not currently match the United States in commercial investment, and it does not match China in state-directed scale, but it has several advantages: a large technical workforce, growing industrial capacity, experience with cost-conscious engineering, a strong domestic need for communications, navigation, and Earth observation services, and political interest in becoming a major space power rather than remaining only a service provider. Now, India may not build the largest system first, but it could become a highly competitive provider of launches, satellites, software, components, and mission services. And in an industry where cost remains one of the biggest barriers, efficiency matters. Now we have Japan. Now, Japan's position is different. Japan is not trying to duplicate every part of the American or Chinese ecosystem. Its strengths are concentrated in areas such as robotics, precision manufacturing, scientific instruments, advanced materials, and automated exploration. Japan has extensive experience aboard the ISS through the Kibo laboratory module. It has developed cargo vehicles. It contributes to lunar exploration programs, and Japanese companies are exploring commercial activity ranging from lunar transportation to orbital services. Now, Japan's robotics experience may become increasingly valuable because much of the work in space will not be performed by humans. It will be performed by machines. So machines that inspect a station, move cargo, repair equipment, collect samples, construct structures, operate in radiation, as well as work in darkness. Now, travel where sending a person would be too expensive or dangerous will also be the use. Now, the country that builds reliable space robotics may control a critical layer of the future economy, even if it does not launch the most rockets. And this is the point I want to emphasize. Leadership does not always mean doing everything. A modern aircraft may include parts, materials, and software from several countries. A space station may use an American launch vehicle, a European habitat component, Japanese robotics, and scientific instruments built by researchers from several nations. So even though the United States and China are the two largest system-level competitors, the future space economy will probably be built through a mixture of rivalry and partnerships. So countries will compete in one area and cooperate in another. They may share scientific information while protecting military technology. They may build one mission together and create separate communication networks. They may depend on each other for components while trying to reduce that dependency at the same time. That is already how the global economy works here on Earth. There is no reason to assume space will be simpler. And we should also be honest about what this race is not. It is not evidence that millions of people will be living on Mars in the next year. It does not mean every proposed station will be built. It does not mean every lunar plan will remain on schedule. Space development is expensive. Projects are delayed, governments change, companies fail, but underneath all of that uncertainty, a real change is taking place. More countries now view space as permanent infrastructure rather than an occasional scientific destination. Which brings us back to the National Space Station. because the ISS has been the center of continuous human activity in low Earth orbit for more than 2 decades. The station is aging. Its missions will not continue forever. And when I first heard that the ISS was going to be retired, I thought the story was about something ending. But the more I looked at the details, the more I realized they are not closing the space company. They are changing who owns the building. Now, the ISS taught researchers how the human body responds to long periods in microgravity, how human muscles weaken, how bones change, how fluids shift, how plants grow, how materials behave, how fire acts differently, how equipment ages, how people live together in a confined environment while traveling around Earth at thousands of miles per hour. It also gave governments and private companies practical experience in launch schedules, docking, life support, cargo delivery, maintenance, and emergency planning. In other words, much of the commercial station industry we are discussing would not exist without the lessons learned aboard the ISS. Now, the ISS was created primarily through governments. Governments helped design it, they funded it, and government agencies and international partners operate it. Private contractors have always played major roles, but the station itself is a public international platform. What NASA wants next is different. NASA wants private companies to finance, build, and operate stations. Then NASA would purchase the time, laboratory access, transportation, and other services it needs. That means NASA would move from being one of the principal owners of the building to becoming a tenant or a customer inside somebody else's building. Now, that comparison is not perfect. NASA will still have strict requirements. Human space flight is not the same as renting an office suite. The agency will need to certify that any station carrying NASA astronauts meets safety and performance standards. But economically, the shift is important. Instead of government carrying the full cost of a station, the private operator is expected to attract several customers. So you have NASA, you have other national space agencies, you have universities, pharmaceutical companies, material researchers, technology companies, private astronauts, possibly tourists, possibly media production, possibly customers that do not even exist yet. NASA's stated goal is to buy services alongside other customers and help stimulate a broader commercial market in low Earth orbit. And that sounds good, but there is a practical question. Are there enough customers? Because building a space station is one thing, keeping it profitable is another. A company can announce a beautiful station, it can produce renderings, it can build a model, it can sign agreements, but eventually somebody has to pay for the launches. So it's power, life support, maintenance, crew training, insurance, communications, replacement equipment, emergency capacity, and regular operations. Space stations do not become affordable simply because the word commercial has been placed in front of them. Now, NASA is expected to remain one of the most important early customers. That makes NASA an anchor tenant. If NASA commits to purchasing research time in astronaut missions, investors may feel more comfortable and confident that a station will have at least one serious customer. Then the company has to develop the rest of the market. This is why NASA is supporting more than one design. The agency does not want to replace one station with one untested company and simply hope everything works. It wants competition, different architectures, different financial models, different technical approaches, and ideally more than one operating destination. That gives NASA choices. It also reduces the risk that one company's delay creates a complete interruption in American access to a space station. Now, NASA has said it is using a phased process, first supporting design and development, then moving towards certification and the purchase of services. But there could still be a gap. The ISS is expected to end operations around 2030. Commercial stations have proposed launch dates near the end of this decade. NASA will still shape the market through technical requirements and purchasing decisions. The more accurate description is commercialization. Activities once performed almost entirely through government programs are being turned into services that companies can sell. Now, NASA wants the station itself to become a service. And once the station becomes a service, a new set of questions appear. Who gets access? What does access cost? Which countries can afford to participate? Who controls the schedule? Who owns discoveries made aboard the station? How are disputes handled? That's important. What happens if a private operator fails financially? What happens if the only available station belongs to a company that the government no longer trusts? What safety standards apply to tourists compared with professional astronauts? And how much of this new economy will still depend on a taxpayer's dollar? Those are not reasons to stop the transaction. They are reasons to pay attention to how it is designed. So when governments and private companies begin constructing a new layer of infrastructure in orbit, that is not only a space story. It is a story what services may eventually become normal on Earth. A society that builds advanced technology but cannot explain it to its citizens creates another kind of risk. It creates a population that depends on systems it does not understand. And when people do not understand a system, they become easier to mislead about what it can do or what it cannot do. This is one reason I wanted to keep this episode grounded. Because if we carry our intelligence into space without carrying our responsibility with it, distance will not save us. A new frontier will not repair old habits, and technology will not make our decisions for us. The future will still depend on judgment, and the willingness to understand that progress is not measured only by what humanity is capable of building. It is also measured by what humanity becomes capable of protecting. Now, I'll close with this statement from Nikola Tesla. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than all the previous centuries of its existence.